the fire that never dies. It was a quiet night at Station 42, nestled at the edge of the Blue Ridge Mountains. Firefighter Jackson Kane leaned back in his chair, sipping on lukewarm coffee. The station was a second home to him, a sanctuary where his crew felt more like family. The night was unusually still, the kind of quiet that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. At precisely 2:13 a.m., the alarm blared. A call had come in, a cabin fire deep in the forest. Dispatcher reports were vague, almost eerie. The caller's voice had trembled as she described a blue fire engulfing the structure, burning without smoke or spreading to nearby trees. The line had gone dead before more details could be gathered. The team geared up quickly, the usual banter replaced by a tense silence. Jackson, a seasoned firefighter with over a decade of experience, felt an inexplicable unease. The fire engine's headlights pierced through the dense fog as they navigated the winding forest road. When they arrived, the sight was like nothing they'd ever seen. The cabin was bathed in an otherworldly blue light, the flames licking the air without producing heat or smoke. The surrounding forest remained untouched. No scorching on the ground, no ember trails leading away from the cabin. As the crew approached with hoses and equipment, Jackson noticed something even stranger. The air was silent. No crackling of wood, no roar of flames, only an eerie stillness broken by faint, unintelligible whispers. Captain Harris barked orders, snapping the crew out of their trance. "Get those hoses ready! Let's knock this thing out!" The first blast of water hit the flames but had no effect. Instead, the fire seemed to shimmer, as if taunting them. Another crew member tried foam retardant. Still nothing. The flames remained steady, neither growing nor diminishing. Then Jackson heard it, a voice, soft and sorrowful, calling his name. He froze, scanning the area. He turned toward the cabin's front door, now wide open, though it had been shut moments earlier. A shadowy figure stood in the doorway, a woman, her features obscured by the glow of the fire. Jackson took a hesitant step forward. The woman raised a hand, beckoning him. Against every logical instinct, he approached. As he drew closer, the whispers grew louder, forming words. "Let it burn. Let it burn." "Who are you?" Jackson called out, his voice trembling. The woman stepped into the light, revealing her ghostly appearance. Her eyes glowed faintly, and her dress was charred and tattered. "You must not extinguish it," she said, her voice layered with echoes. "The fire holds the souls of my family. If it dies, so do we." Jackson blinked, struggling to process her words. He stepped back toward his crew, who stood frozen, their faces pale. "Did you see that?" he asked. "See what?" Captain Harris replied, his voice unsteady. Jackson turned back, but the woman was gone. Back at the station, Jackson couldn't shake the encounter. Determined to uncover the truth, he spent hours combing through local archives. He eventually found a chilling story from the 1920s. A wealthy family had lived in that cabin, a couple and their 3 children. A jealous rival had set the house ablaze, trapping the family inside. Neighbors reported seeing blue flames that night, and no remains were ever recovered. The legend claimed the fire had been started with a cursed artifact, a relic brought from overseas. The artifact, a small jade pendant, was said to bind souls to the place where they perished. The more Jackson read, the more he felt drawn to the cabin. The whispers had imprinted on his mind, and the woman's sorrowful eyes haunted his dreams. 2 nights later, another call came in. The cabin was burning again. This time, the flames seemed brighter, more intense. Jackson felt a pull he couldn't resist. He convinced Captain Harris to let him lead the response team. When they arrived, the scene was more chaotic. The whispers were louder, the fire seemed alive, and the woman reappeared, standing just beyond the threshold. "This fire must remain," she pleaded. "The pendant binds us here. If you destroy it, we will be lost forever." Jackson stared into her glowing eyes, understanding the weight of her words. He realized the fire wasn't consuming the cabin. It was consuming her family's torment, keeping them tethered to this world. Suddenly, a fierce wind picked up, threatening to spread the fire to the forest. The crew panicked, preparing to fight the blaze, but Jackson knew what had to be done. "I'll go in," he said, clutching the pendant he had found in the archives, now hanging around his neck. "What are you talking about?" Harris shouted. Jackson ignored him, stepping into the flames. The fire enveloped him, but he felt no pain, only a deep, overwhelming sadness. Inside, he saw the family, the mother, father, and children, their faces frozen in anguish. Holding the pendant high, Jackson spoke. "You're free now." The fire roared, and a blinding light consumed the cabin. When the crew finally entered the ruins, they found no trace of Jackson. The fire had died completely, leaving behind only cold ashes and an unearthly stillness. As they packed up to leave, a soft breeze carried a whisper, "Thank you." Back at the station, Jackson's locker stood open. Inside was the jade pendant, glowing faintly blue, a reminder of his sacrifice. In the years that followed, the cabin never burned again. But on quiet nights, some say you can still hear the faint whispers of a family finally at peace, and the name of the man who set them free. The Phantom Responder. Ellie Morgan's first shift at Station 13 began with the usual nerves of a rookie. The sprawling old firehouse, with its faded red bricks and creaky wooden floors, seemed to breathe history. Ellie quickly learned that Station 13 wasn't just known for its long-standing service to the city. It also had a reputation for the strange and unexplained. As she was shown around, she felt the camaraderie in the air, but there was an underlying tension she couldn't ignore. Ryan, the grizzled veteran of the team, was the first to mention it. "Welcome to the best and the weirdest firehouse in the city," he said, slapping her on the shoulder. "And just so you know, don't freak out when you meet Frank." Ellie frowned. "Who's Frank?" The room fell silent. Everyone exchanged glances before Ryan chuckled darkly. "You'll see. Everybody does eventually." Ellie rolled her eyes, assuming it was a hazing tactic, but the unease among the team lingered. Later that night, as they sat around the long table for dinner, the crew opened up more. "You ever hear about the fire at the old Sullivan warehouse?" asked Pete, the team's joker. "Back in the 90s? Ellie shook her head. "That's where Frank Carter died," said Captain Hall. His voice carried weight, and the joking atmosphere evaporated. "He saved 6 kids that night, but he didn't make it out himself. Thing is," Ryan added, lowering his voice, "he never really left." Ellie laughed nervously. "You're serious?" The crew nodded solemnly. "Whenever we're in the thick of it," Pete said, "when things get bad, someone always spots him. Gear straight out of the 90s, moving like he's one of us. Saves a life, then disappears. It's like he's still doing his job." Ellie couldn't help but feel a chill. Ellie didn't have to wait long to test her mettle. Just 2 nights later, Station 13 responded to a massive fire at a sprawling warehouse in the industrial district. Flames tore through the building, the air thick with acrid smoke. Dispatch confirmed multiple workers were trapped inside. The crew moved like a well-oiled machine, coordinating their efforts to battle the blaze and locate survivors. Ellie paired up with Ryan to search the east wing, where the fire was spreading rapidly. "Stick close," Ryan said. "This place is a maze." As they navigated through the debris, Ellie heard a faint voice over the crackle of the flames. "Help! Over here!" She turned toward the sound and froze. A firefighter in outdated turnout gear stood at the end of the hall, barely visible through the smoke. His movements were calm, deliberate. "Who's that?" Ellie asked, pointing. Ryan looked where she gestured, but saw nothing. "What are you talking about?" Before Ellie could answer, the figure disappeared. Ellie broke away from Ryan, following the direction where the figure had been. She found a group of workers trapped behind a collapsed metal shelf. The flames crept closer, and the heat was suffocating. "Hang on," Ellie shouted, pulling at the debris. She struggled, but then felt a strong presence beside her. The figure was back, lifting the heavy metal with ease and motioning for her to help guide the workers out. When the last worker was safe, Ellie turned to thank him, but he was gone. "Who helped you?" Ryan asked when she emerged with the survivors. Ellie hesitated, unsure of how to explain. Back at the station, Ellie told the crew what happened. She expected them to laugh, but instead they nodded knowingly. "You saw Frank," Ryan said. "Told you it would happen." Ellie leaned forward. "So he's what? A ghost? Some kind of guardian angel?" "No one knows," Captain Hall said. "He just shows up when we need him most, and when he does, people survive." The conversation shifted into stories of Frank's appearances over the years. One firefighter recounted how Frank had guided him out of a collapsing house. Another spoke of how Frank had saved a family trapped in an overturned bus. "He's part of the team," Pete said. "Dead or not." Despite the camaraderie, Ellie couldn't shake the unease. She decided to dig deeper into Frank's story. Ellie spent her next few days off at the local library, poring over news archives. She found article after article about Frank Carter, a firefighter hailed as a hero after his death. But there was something strange. Accounts of fires saved by mysterious means began shortly after his passing. She also learned that Frank had confided in a friend about recurring nightmares before his death. In these dreams, he was trapped in a burning building, saving people over and over, but never escaping himself. The most chilling detail came from a report she hadn't expected. Frank's body had never been recovered from the Sullivan warehouse. It was assumed he had been incinerated in the blaze, but no remains had ever been found. Ellie didn't have time to dwell on her findings. A new call came in, a school fire during the early morning hours. Children were trapped inside, and the scene was chaos. As Ellie and her crew raced through the halls, she felt the oppressive heat and fear gnawing at her. She found a group of children huddled in a classroom, too scared to move. She tried to lead them out, but the fire cut off their escape route. Panic set in as the flames closed in. Then, through the smoke, Frank appeared. His gear was pristine, untouched by the fire. He didn't speak, but his presence was calming. He motioned for Ellie to follow as he kicked open a door that should have been impassable. The children followed Ellie as Frank led them through the maze of fire and smoke. At one point, a ceiling beam collapsed, pinning Ellie's leg. Frank appeared again, lifting the beam effortlessly. "Get them out," he said, his voice low and steady. Ellie limped toward the exit with the children. When she turned back to thank him, he was gone. After the fire was extinguished, Ellie stayed behind, combing through the debris. Near the spot where Frank had freed her, she found an old badge, half buried in ash. It was Frank's. Back at the station, she placed the badge beneath Frank's photo on the wall. She felt a wave of gratitude and peace. "Thank you," she whispered. That night, the crew gathered around the table, sharing stories of Frank's heroism. For the first time, Ellie felt truly part of the family, a family that extended beyond life and death. And as the night deepened, she swore she could hear the faint sound of footsteps pacing the station's halls, a silent guardian watching over his team. The Ashen Child, firefighter Luis Alvarez, loved the rhythm of his life at Station 9. Days were filled with camaraderie, training, and the occasional tense call. But tonight was different. The station received a report of a massive fire at an abandoned orphanage on the outskirts of town, a place steeped in urban legends. The crew geared up quickly, their chatter subdued as they drove through the dark streets. Luis felt a strange weight settle over him. He had been on countless calls, but this one felt different, almost personal. When they arrived, the scene was chaotic. Flames consumed the old stone building, their orange glow cutting through the night. The fire behaved strangely. It moved in waves, flickering like it was alive. The air was thick, not just with smoke, but with a heavy, unexplainable presence. As the crew prepared to enter the building, a sound pierced through the roar of the flames, a child's cry. Luis's heart clenched. There shouldn't have been anyone in the orphanage. It had been abandoned for decades. Yet the cry was unmistakable, filled with desperation. "Did you hear that?" Luis asked, turning to his crew. Ryan, his partner, nodded, his face pale. "Yeah, sounded like a kid." They entered the building, navigating through collapsing walls and smoke-filled corridors. Luis took the lead, following the sound of the cries. The deeper they went, the more the air seemed to close in around them. Finally, Luis found her, a little girl curled up in a corner, her soot-covered face streaked with tears. She looked no older than 7, her dress singed and tattered. "It's okay," Luis said gently, crouching down. "I'm here to help." The girl looked up, her wide eyes glowing faintly. "You can't save me," she whispered. Luis froze, the words chilling him more than the fire ever could. But before he could respond, a collapsing beam forced him to act. He scooped her up and ran toward the exit. As soon as Luis crossed the threshold of the orphanage, the girl vanished. One moment she was in his arms, and the next she was gone, leaving behind only a faint trail of ash. Luis stumbled, his mind reeling. "Where is she?" he shouted, looking around wildly. Ryan grabbed his shoulder. "What are you talking about? You came out alone." "No, I didn't," Luis insisted. She was right here. But the rest of the crew exchanged uneasy glances. Luis knew what he had seen, but he couldn't explain it. Back at the station, Luis couldn't sleep. The girl's glowing eyes and sorrowful whisper haunted him. He started digging into the history of the orphanage. What he found sent a chill down his spine. 30 years ago, the building had burned down under mysterious circumstances. A faulty boiler was blamed, but survivors claimed they heard strange whispers before the fire started. The most unsettling detail was about the children who had perished. Their bodies were never recovered, and locals whispered that their spirits were trapped in the ruins, unable to move on. Luis's gut told him the girl he'd seen was one of them. In the weeks that followed, similar fires broke out across the town. An abandoned church, an old factory, a condemned apartment building. Each time, Luis heard the same cry for help, and each time when he found the girl, she vanished as soon as he tried to save her. The fires seemed connected, as if they were drawing him towards something. Luis noticed a pattern. Each location had ties to tragedies involving children. It was as if the fires were revealing a forgotten history of pain and loss. His crew grew concerned. "You've been distracted," Ryan said during a quiet moment. "You need to talk to someone." "I'm fine," Luis lied, but he wasn't fine. He felt consumed by the girl's sorrow, her unspoken story. One night, a fire erupted at a forgotten part of the city, a crumbling theater that had once hosted children's plays. Luis knew, deep down, that this was it. This was where he'd find the answers. The crew rushed to the scene, but Luis moved with a singular focus. He followed the cries, weaving through the burning structure until he found the girl standing in the center of the stage. This time she didn't look afraid. She looked sad but resolved. "Why do you keep calling me?" Luis asked, his voice breaking. "You're the only one who hears us," she said. "The only one who can help." "Help how?" She pointed to the ceiling where a charred wooden beam was about to collapse. Luis barely had time to react, pulling her close as the beam fell. But instead of hitting them, it disintegrated into ash, revealing a hidden staircase beneath the stage. Luis followed the girl down the staircase, emerging into a small hidden room. The air was cold, and the walls were covered in soot-stained drawings. At the center of the room was a pile of objects, toys, shoes, and a charred book. "This is where they left us," the girl said, her voice barely a whisper. Luis felt a wave of grief crash over him. He realized this room had been a refuge during the fire all those years ago. The children had hidden here, but no one had come for them. "What do you need me to do?" Luis asked. "Remember us," she said. "Make sure no one forgets." The girl reached out, placing a small, soot-covered locket in his hand. When Luis emerged from the theater, the fire was gone. The building stood charred but intact, as if the flames had extinguished themselves. His crew stared at him, their faces a mix of confusion and relief. "What happened in there?" Ryan asked. Luis looked down at the locket in his hand. "I found them." In the days that followed, Luis shared the story of the orphanage and the children lost to its fire. He worked tirelessly to ensure their names were remembered, organizing a memorial and bringing attention to the forgotten tragedies the fires stopped. And though Luis never saw the girl again, he often felt her presence, a faint warmth, a whisper in the wind, a sense of peace in the ashes.